For well over a century after America's founding, the US dollar's value held relatively steady. We would have events that led to massive inflation, such as the War of 1812, the Civil War, loose banking policies. Then when the money contracted, we would see deflation. While this was rocky, the value of the dollar remained relatively unchanged. $100 in 1790 was equal to about $105 in 1912. During this time, the United States currency was tied to either a bimetallic standard or a gold standard. And while there was a first and second national bank and the national banking system, there was not anything as powerful as the Federal Reserve today. But this would all change in 1913, and we would see the slow death of the US dollar, losing 97% of its value over time. I'm Ryan Stahlberg, a retired Marine Corps Infantry officer and combat veteran with deployments to Afghanistan and Iraq. I started my journey at the Citadel, where I graduated with a BA in history, and I've been researching history for decades. To understand the dollar's downfall, we start with its stable roots. From 1789, when the US Constitution empowered Congress to coin money, through 1912, America's currency was largely backed by precious metals under a bimetallic or gold standard system. The Coinage Act of 1792 established a bimetallic standard, where both gold and silver coins were legal tender at a fixed ratio, initially 15-to-1 silver to gold, allowing for stable money tied to real assets. This system dominated until the late 19th century, though silver's role diminished over time due to market fluctuations and discoveries like the California gold rush, which shifted the effective ratio and led to silver overvaluation. By 1873, with the Coinage Act, often called the Crime of 73 by silver advocates, silver was effectively demonetized for coinage, paving the way for a de facto gold standard. This was formalized with the Gold Standard Act of 1900 under President McKinley, which pegged the dollar solely to gold at $20.67 per ounce, ending bimetallism officially. Throughout this era, inflation spiked during wars, the War of 1812 or the Civil War, with rates up to 20 to 30% in peak years. But deflation followed, bringing prices back down. A key issue during crises such as the War of 1812 was the suspension of specie payments. In 1814, amid financing needs and bank runs, the federal government allowed banks outside New England to suspend redeeming notes for gold or silver, leading to unchecked inflation and note depreciation until resumption in 1817. This pattern of suspensions, also seen briefly in 1857 and during the Civil War, highlighted vulnerabilities in the system, where banks could print notes without full backing, fueling temporary booms and busts. Post-Civil War, the US faced depreciated greenbacks, fiat paper money issued during the war, and heavy debt. The Resumption Act of 1875 aimed to address this by resuming specie payments, but it wasn't implemented until 1879, marking a full return to the gold standard for the first time since before the Civil War. This hard money shift ushered in one of the most prosperous eras in US history during the 1880s. While wholesale prices fell, a natural deflationary trend under gold due to productivity gains, real wages rose, and the decade saw explosive growth in manufacturing, farming output, and overall wealth, not just for industrialists, but also farmers, despite uneven sector paces. Overall, the net result from 1789 to 1912? The average annual inflation rate hovered around 0.5 to 1%, with cumulative price changes close to zero. $1 in 1789 bought roughly what it did in 1912. No long-term erosion. This stability came from hard money. You couldn't just print endlessly without backing. Banks issued notes redeemable in gold or silver, and the economy self-corrected through booms and busts. But that all changed in 1913. Enter the Federal Reserve Act, signed by President Woodrow Wilson on December 23, 1913. Born from decades of banking schemes, detailed in histories like Murray Rothbard's works, it created a central bank system with 12 regional banks overseen by a board in D.C. Pushed by Wall Street titans like J.P. Morgan after panics like 1907, the Fed gained power to control money supply, set interest rates, and create dollars out of thin air through fractional reserve lending and open market operations. While the U.S. remained on the gold standard at the time, with dollars still convertible to gold until 1933 domestically, The Fed introduced greater elasticity, allowing banks to expand credit more freely within those constraints, fueling potential inflation even under gold backing. Early on, it financed World War I by printing, leading to 1917-1920 inflation peaks over 15% annually. Deflation followed in the 1920s, but the Fed's loose policies in the Roaring '20s set the stage for the Great Depression. Fast forward to the 1930s, the Depression hit hard, with deflation reaching negative 10% in 1932 as banks failed and money supply contracted. President Franklin D. Roosevelt responded with Executive Order 6102 in April 1933, confiscating private gold at $20.67 per ounce, making it a crime for Americans to hold gold coins or bullion, with penalties up to 10 years in prison. Then in January 1934, he devalued the dollar overnight by raising the official gold price to $35 per ounce, a 40% devaluation that transferred wealth from savers to the government. This inflated the money supply, ending deflation but eroding the dollar's value. Inflation ticked up to 3% by 1934, but at the cost of trust in sound money. Overall, inflation was steadily gaining steam since 1913. From 1913 to 1940, inflation rose over 40%. Relatively speaking, this was a dramatic jump from the early days of the Republic. This shift introduced what economists called a quasi-gold standard, or gold exchange standard, from 1933 to 1971. While the dollar remained tied to gold internationally, foreign governments could still redeem dollars for gold at the new $35 rate. Domestic convertibility was banned. Americans could no longer exchange their paper money for gold, severing the direct link for citizens and giving the government more leeway to manipulate the money supply without the full constraints of a true gold standard. This was a pivotal step toward full fiat money. It allowed inflation without immediate gold redemptions, draining reserves, prioritizing economic stimulus over hard money principles, and setting the stage for even greater monetary flexibility. Post-World War II, the dollar's fate was sealed at the Bretton Woods Conference in 1944. 44 nations agreed to peg their currencies to the US dollar, which was convertible to gold at $35 per ounce for foreign governments. This made the dollar the world's reserve currency, promoting stability and trade. Inflation averaged under 2% in the 1950s, but it wasn't without flaws. As the US spent on the Vietnam War and the Great Society programs, the Fed printed more dollars, leading to gold outflows as foreigners redeemed for gold. By the late 1960s, inflation climbed to 5 to 6%, straining the system. Bretton Woods provided short-term stability but sowed seeds for future devaluation. The breaking point came on August 15, 1971, the Nixon shock. Facing severe gold runs, France literally sent warships to the US to retrieve gold. In a weakening dollar, President Richard Nixon closed the gold window, ending foreign convertibility and effectively severing the dollar's last tie to gold. He also imposed wage price controls and a 10% import surcharge. The dollar devalued immediately. By 1973, it had lost 20% against major currencies, and floating exchange rates began. Without gold's anchor, inflation spun out of control. The 1970s saw double-digit rates, peaking at 13.5% in 1980 amid oil shocks and loose money. Stagflation, high inflation with high unemployment, crushed savers, with the dollar losing over 50% of its purchasing power that decade. This fiat system, money backed by nothing but trust, enabled endless printing. In recent years, it hit overdrive during COVID-19. From 2020 to 2022, the Federal Reserve expanded its balance sheet from about $4 trillion to nearly $9 trillion through quantitative easing, buying bonds and injecting liquidity. The M2 money supply surged by over 40% with trillions printed for stimulus checks, PPP loans, and economic support, about $6 trillion in new money overall. The result? Inflation exploded to 9% in 2022, the highest since the 1980s, eroding wages and savings. Supply chains and demand played roles, but money printing was the fuel. Since 1913, the dollar has lost over 96% of its purchasing power. $1 then buys about what 3 cents does today. From the Fed's creation to FDR's gold grab and the quasi-gold shift, Bretton Woods' false stability, Nixon's shock, and COVID trillions, Government policies have devalued our money to fund wars, crises, and deficits. Bankers, defense companies, and other megacorporations have benefited greatly from these policies. But who got hit the hardest? The middle class by far. While asset prices ballooned, inflation wipes out the middle class savings in some cases overnight. And to top it all, wage increases greatly lag behind inflation and ultimately never catch up. The US dollar is in a death spiral. Is there any way to stop it? Can we return to sound money? Thanks for watching Manifest History. Comment below. Has inflation hit your family hard? Check out my Federal Reserve series next. Please like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell.